All right, so to solve using the quadratic formula, let's start by writing our quadratic formula. We have x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So this you guys have to know. Before we can just start plugging things into our quadratic formula, what would we have to do first for this question? Subtract 9. We got to move it to the other side because in order to use the quadratic formula, we want it to be equal to 0. We need it to be equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract 9. So x squared plus 3x minus 9 is equal to 0. Once we have it equal to 0, we can label what our a, b, and c are and then just plug it into our quadratic formula. So a would be 1, b is 3, and c is negative 9. So x is equal to negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 3 squared minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is negative 9, over 2a. So 2 times 1. From here we simplify. So x is equal to negative 3 plus or minus the square root of, let's simplify under our square root. This would be 9. Negative 4 times 1 times negative 9 would be positive 36. And 9 plus 36 is 45. Over 2. Could I just leave my answer like this? No, why not? We can simplify our radical. Always simplify the radical if you can. So let's break it down. We have the square root of 45. What are 2 factors of 45? 9 and 5. From here, you may be able just to write it as 3 square root 5, because you know 9 is a perfect square that breaks down into 3. But if you need to break it down more, that's fine. Whatever it takes to get the right answer. So 9 breaks down into 3 times 3. We have a group of 3s, so 3 comes to the outside and 5 has to stay on the inside. So our answer would be negative 3 plus or minus 3 square root 5 over 2. Completing the square always works when you are solving a quadratic equation. It's just not always going to be the easiest choice of how to solve. Sometimes it's easier to factor, but quadratic formula will always give you the correct answer. It might on WebAssign want negative 3. Oh, actually, I think it does want you to separate it into 2 on WebAssign. So negative 3 plus 3 square root 5 over 2. And negative 3 minus 3 square root 5 over 2. I think that WebAssign may want it as 2 different answers like this. I'm not sure. Does anybody know? Have you done quadratic formula on WebAssign yet? Okay. It may want this way. WebAssign's a little picky sometimes. But plus or minus on a test or quiz is fine as long as everything's simplified there. We want to subtract the 48x squared to move it to the other side. Perfect. So 3x to the 4th power minus 48x squared is equal to 0. Now that it's equal to 0, what can we do? Awesome. Let's take out the GCF, which is a 3x squared. When we take out the 3x squared, we're left with x squared minus 16. Can this be factored anymore? How can we factor x squared minus 16 more? X plus 4, x minus 4. Awesome. It's the difference of squares. What can we do next? Set each piece equal to 0. So 3x squared equals 0. What does x equal? 0. X plus 4 equals 0, x is equal to negative 4, and x is equal to positive 4. So these would be our 3 answers. In the beginning, Another way we could have started this is kind of similar to what we did in the last one. If we see that we have a GCF from the beginning that's just a constant, you can divide that out. So we see that 3 goes into 3 and 48. We can divide them both by 3, so we're left with x to the 4th power is equal to 16x squared. And you'd get the same answer. But remember, you cannot do this with a variable. You can't divide out a variable. You'll lose an answer choice. So if you want to divide out a constant, that's fine. But if you have a variable, you got to put that on the outside. Can't divide out a variable and get rid of it. Got to keep it because that is an answer. Also, in this step here, if you don't factor all the way and you just set them both equal to 0, x squared minus 16 is equal to 0. You could just solve it from here too. You don't have to factor it all the way into x plus 4 and x minus 4. When you solve this, we'd add 16 to the other side. How would I solve next? What would I do? Square root both sides. So what does x equal? Plus or minus 4. Awesome. Which would give us the same thing. So either way works. I would recommend factoring it all the way, but if you get to something that you can solve, you can just stop there and set them equal to 0. If this was still a trinomial, you'd have to factor it more because you couldn't just set it equal to 0. Next, we're going to be solving equations involving radicals. So operations such as squaring each side of an equation, raising each side of an equation to a rational power, and multiplying each side of an equation by a variable can introduce extraneous solutions. So extraneous solutions just means that we have to check our answer. It's always a good habit, no matter what, to check your answer. That way you know if you did it right or not. So always, 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 if you have time on a test or quiz, just check everything. You can plug any answer back into the original question and see if you did it right. Let's take a look at A. When solving equations that have radicals, step 1 is we always want to isolate the radical if we can. So what should we do first for A? Add x. We got to add x, move it to the other side to get our square root all by itself. So the square root of 2x plus 7 is equal to x plus 2. Now how do we get rid of the square root? Square both sides. So we're going to square the left side, so it'll cancel out with the square root. On the right side, we're squaring the whole thing. So it is x plus 2 squared. So now on the left side, we have 2x plus 7 is equal to, how do we do x plus 2 squared? Awesome. If you need to, write it twice and FOIL it out. So x plus 2 times x plus 2. We end up with x squared plus 4x plus 4. So I kind of skipped a step. If you need to write it out and FOIL it, that's perfectly fine. What should we do next? Awesome. We want to move all of our terms to one side because we see that we have an x squared and an x, so we know we have to factor. So in order to factor, it has to be equal to 0. Subtract 2x and subtract 7. So 0 is equal to x squared plus 2x minus 3. Do we have two factors of negative 3 that add to 2? What are they? Awesome, 3 and negative 1. So x plus 3 and x minus 1 is equal to 0. Set them both equal to 0. So x is equal to? Awesome, negative 3 and 1. Now since we squared both sides and we're dealing with radicals here, we want to check our work. We have to plug it back in to check. What can I not have under a radical? Negatives. Can't have negatives, but also when you have square roots and you're solving your equations here, you want to plug it in all the way just to make sure your equation makes sense. You'll end up, it'll be positive numbers under your radical, but it may not make sense in the entire equation. So just check the equation all the way. So let's start by plugging in -3. So 2 times -3 would be -6, plus 7 is 1. And what's the square root of 1? 1 minus -3. What's 1 minus -3? 4. Does 4 equal 2? No. So does -3 work as a solution? No. So -3 is not an answer. Let's check 1 also. 2 times 1 would be 2, plus 7 is 9. What's the square root of 9? 3. And 3 minus 1 is 2. Does 2 equal 2? Yep, so 1 would be our answer. All right, let's do B. So step 1 we said is to isolate our radical. Here we have 2 radicals, so we really can't isolate it, but let's at least isolate one of them. What should we do to isolate our radical here? Add square root x minus 3 to move it to the other side. So we have the square root of 2x minus 5 is equal to 1 plus the square root of x minus 3. You can't just square both sides from the beginning, because then you'd end up having to FOIL out 2x minus the square root of 2x minus 5 minus square root of x minus 3. It's just a lot more work. So isolate one of your radicals before you square both sides. So from here, we're going to square both sides. Square root and the squared cancels. 2x minus 5 is equal to, what do we do next? Write it twice and FOIL it out if you need to see it. So x plus the square root of x minus 3, or 1 plus the square root of x minus 3 times 1 plus the square root of x minus 3. So when we FOIL this, 1 times 1 would be 1. Then we have square root of x minus 3 plus the square root of x minus 3. So that would be 2 square root of x minus 3. Plus, what's the square root of x minus 3 times the square root of x minus 3? X minus 3. So from here, we still have a radical in our equation. So let's isolate the radical again. Let's move everything to the other side. So I'm going to move things and combine my like terms. So I'm going to subtract 1, subtract x, and add 3. So we get x. -5 minus 1 would be -6, plus 3 is -3. So x minus 3 is equal to 2 square root x minus 3. You can divide the 2 over, but that would leave us with fractions on the left side. And ideally, we don't really want to work with fractions, especially when we have to FOIL. So I'm just going to leave the 2 there, and I'll deal with dividing it over at the end. So from here, what would we do to get rid of the square root? Square both sides. So we're going to square the left side and square the right side. On the left side, we have to FOIL it out, so we end up with x squared minus 6x plus 9. On the right side, 2 gets squared and the square root of x minus 3 gets squared. So 2 squared is 4, and square root of x minus 3 squared is x minus 3. From here, we can just solve. Let's distribute the 4. So x squared minus 6x plus 9 is equal to 4x minus 12. What would we do next? Move everything to one side. Since we have an x squared and an x, we know that we have to factor. So we're going to move everything to one side to make it equal to 0. So subtract 4x and add 12. X squared minus 10x plus 21 is equal to 0. Do we have two factors of 21 that adds negative 10? What? Negative 3 and negative 7. So x minus 3 and x minus 7 equals 0. What does x equal? 3 and 7. We have to plug them in to see if it works. So let's go back to our original question and plug them in. So starting with 3. 2 times 3 would be 6. 6 minus 5 is 1. What's the square root of 1? 1. Then 3 minus 3 would be 0. What's the square root of 0? 0. And 1 minus 0, does that equal 1? Yep, so it works there. So 3 works as an answer. Let's try 7. So we have 2 times 7 would be 14 minus 5 is 9. What's the square root of 9? 3. Minus 7 minus 3 is 4. What's the square root of 4? 2. Does 3 minus 2 give you 1? Yep. So it also works. So we have two answers here, 3 and 7. Next, we're going to be solving an equation involving a rational exponent. So we're going to have a fraction as our exponent. When you have a fraction as an exponent, it just means that you have a square root and an exponent together in one question. So we know how to solve when we have square roots or when we have radicals and when we have exponents. So this is the same idea. The number on top is the exponent. The number on the bottom is the index for our radical. So here we have the cubed root of x minus 4 to the second power is equal to 25. So the number on top is the exponent. The number on the bottom is our index. All I did was write this in a different way, just to make it a little bit easier for us to see. How do I get rid of a squared when I'm solving? Square root. So we're going to square root both sides to get rid of that squared. So now we have the cubed root of x minus 4 is equal to what? It's equal to what? Plus or minus 5. If you want to, write this as two separate questions now because you have a positive 5 and a negative 5. So cubed root of x minus 4 is equal to 5, and the cubed root of x minus 4 is equal to negative 5. How do I get rid of the cubed root? Cube both sides. Bless you. So the cubed cancels out with the cubed root. So x minus 4 is equal to, what's 5 cubed? 125. Then we can add 4 to move it to the other side. So x is equal to 129. Same thing with the other one. We cube both sides to get rid of the cubed root. X minus 4 is equal to, what's negative 5 cubed? Negative 125. And then we add 4. So x is equal to negative 121. What does an absolute value do to the equation or the number inside?
It makes it positive.
It makes it positive. Absolute values talks about the distance from 0. How far, whatever's inside your absolute value is from 0. So since you're talking about the distance, it's always positive. When we solve equations with absolute values, you want to isolate your absolute value and then split it up into two separate equations, because the inside of that absolute value could be positive and it could be negative. So we got to account for both of them. So once you isolate your absolute value, you want to split it. Now here, when it splits it, it gives you the example of x minus 2 is equal to 3. You keep it exactly the same. The other one, you make it negative. So here, put the negative on the left side. So it said negative x minus 2 is equal to 3. You can write it on the right side too. This would be the same as saying x minus 2 is equal to negative 3. When I split it, I usually put the negative on the right side, especially if it's just equal to a number. Kind of just makes it easier. So if you had the absolute value of x plus 1 is equal to 5. When I split it, I keep the first one exactly the same. The second one, I would say x plus 1 is equal to negative 5. So let's look at example 14. So step 1 is always isolate the absolute value. Step 2 is to split it. Our absolute value is already isolated here, so now we can just split it. So the first one stays exactly the same. X squared minus 3x is equal to negative 4x plus 6. Second one, we're going to make negative, so x squared minus 3x is equal to negative 4x plus 6. So just pick a side that you want to make negative. Don't make them both negative, because then it ends up being the same thing as the original. Let's solve from here. What would I need to do to solve this? Add 4x and subtract 6. Move it to the other side. Why? What are we going to have to do? Factor. Oops, subtract 6. We see that we have an x squared and an x, so we know we have to factor, so it has to be equal to 0. So x squared plus x minus 6 is equal to 0. Do we have two factors of negative 6 that add to 1? 3 and negative 2. Awesome. So x plus 3 and x minus 2 equals 0. What does x equal? Negative 3 and positive 2. We're going to want to check these at the end, but we'll come back to it. Let's find our other answers for the second part of it after we split it. So we split it and made it negative. What should we do first here to solve? Before we do that, we got to distribute the negative. So this becomes positive 4x and minus 6. So then we can subtract 4x to move it to the other side and add 6. So x squared minus 7x plus 6 is equal to 0. Do we have two factors of 6 that add to negative 7? Yes. What? Awesome, negative 6 and negative 1. So x minus 6 and x minus 1, x is equal to 6 and 1. Let's check our work. Let's start by plugging in negative 3. We'll just go in order. So negative 3 squared would be what? 9. Negative 3 times negative 3 would also be 9, so this would be 18. Negative 3 times negative 4 would be 12. 12 plus 6 is also 18. So does negative 3 work? Yep. So that's an answer. Let's try 2. Oops. 2 squared is 4 minus 3x times, or 3 times 2 would be 6. 4 minus 6 is negative 2. Absolute value makes it positive 2. Is equal to Negative 4 times 2 would be negative 8. And negative 8 plus 6 is negative 2. Does 2 equal negative 2? Nope, so 2 does not work. You can plug in 6 and 1, but just for the sake of time, 6 does not work. And 1 does, yes.
Wait, so why did you change the negative 2 into a positive 2? Like, because of the absolute value? Like, it was negative 2 and you're like, it's absolute value, so we switch it? Like, how do you know to switch that?
For the first question, what would we do to solve? Take out the GCF. Our GCF would be x squared. When we take out the x squared, we're left with 3 plus 2x equals 0. From here, we just set them both equal to 0. So x is equal to 0 and x is equal to what? Negative 3 halves. Perfect. So example 2. Same idea. What would we do to solve? Awesome. We have x minus 1 squared in both terms, so let's factor it out. So we're going to take out an x minus 1 squared. So it's almost exactly the same as the last question that we did, but instead of it being x's that we factored out here, it's x minus 1's. So we're going to take out the x minus 1 squared. We're left with 3x plus 2 times x minus 1, because we still have one of them left in there. Does everybody see what I did there? Any questions so far? From here, let's just simplify. X minus 1 squared is going to stay as that. We can distribute the 2 inside. So we have 3x plus 2x minus 2. And combine like terms. So we get 5x minus 2. What would we do next to solve? You shouldn't, because if you have x minus 1 squared, a lot of people will look at this and think, oh, I need to FOIL it out. No, it's already factored, so you shouldn't FOIL it out. Not that you don't have to, you shouldn't. You want to leave it as x minus 1 squared. It's factored already. The only other thing that you could do is write it as x minus 1 times x minus 1. If you wanted to write out all your factors, but you don't have to. Because from here, we'd set everything equal to 0. But x minus 1 is equal to 0 and x minus 1 is equal to 0 gives you the same answer. So if you would have just set them equal to 0 up here, same thing. Because you don't have to list the same answer twice. So x is equal to 1 and x is equal to 2 over 5. So this step isn't necessary. You could just set them equal from here. Any questions? Let's look at example 3. So again, we are going to solve by factoring. Same idea as the last one. What should we do here? Take out the GCF. What is our GCF? Let's think about it. We had, in the last one, x squared and x to the third power. What was our GCF between x squared and x to the third power? Which one? x squared. We took out the x squared. We take out the smaller one because that's what they both have in common. So what's smaller between 1/2 and 3/2? 1/2 is smaller. It's a smaller fraction. So we're going to take out the x minus 1 to the 1/2 power. We're left with 3x plus 2. Now when we take out the x minus 1 to the 1/2 power here, what do we do to find out how much we have left? Subtract it. Awesome. Just like before, when we had x squared that we took out as our GCF, we have 3 x's and we take 2 away, we're left with 1. You subtract 3 minus 2. Here, same thing, but it's just fractions. 3 over 2 minus 1 over 2 would be 2 over 2, which is 1. So we're left with x minus 1 to the power of 1, which you don't need to write because it's just 1. And that's equal to 0. Any questions on what I just did there? From here, we solve the same way we did the last one. We have x minus 1 to the 1/2 power. That stays. I'm going to distribute the 2. So we have 2x minus 2. 3x plus 2x would be 5x minus 2. From here, we can just set them both equal to 0. Do I need to do anything special with the x minus 1 to the 1/2 power equals 0? How would I get rid of that 1/2 power? Square both sides. Awesome. And what's 0 squared? 0. So x minus 1 is equal to 0. X is equal to 1. And then the other one, x is equal to 2 over 5. So those would be our 2 answers.